Hello, my name is Sophie, and I'm going to be reading 1 Corinthians chapter 13 for us. I'll start. And yet, I will show you the most excellent way. If I speak in tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. It does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. Love never fails, but where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love.
This might be a little bit ambitious, but I'm hoping by the end of this talk you will become more loving. A little bit ambitious, I know, because you're already so loving. But this passage sets a really high bar for love. It's not just asking you to commit to love, you're already committed to love. It's asking you to elevate love right up high. That's kind of like my title for this talk, Elevate Love. And if you're to think back over the last week at a time you weren't as loving as you could be, it's not because you weren't committed to love. I mean, you wish you were more consistently loving. It's just that some other pressure or need or want elevated itself over love and then squished love down and relegated love. I'll try and show you with a bit of a story. I was listening to the radio once to this segment called Give or Take, and it's a choice between taking the money or giving it to someone else. And there's $5,000 on this particular episode, and there's this lady, Kate, Ashley really needs the money. She's moved to Australia from New Zealand, and her husband has had an accident at work, and so they're struggling for income. And then basically her dad dies. She has to get an aeroplane to New Zealand, and they didn't have enough money, so they got it on credit. Now they've got a credit card debt. They're back in Australia. They're struggling to pay for things for their kids and for the food for their table. And so they get brought into this radio show, being offered $5,000, but you know how it works. They go and get some random off the street. This lady's walking the dog. Her name's Kate. She's like, you come in and play Give or Take. You can take the $5,000 or you can give the $5,000. What's it going to be? What they didn't realise when they got this lady, Kate, from off the street was that she only had $8 in her bank account. She'd been struggling she was working as a cleaner, doing night shifts and, through the weekend and weeknights. She couldn't pay for her kids' basic things, like she was saying that she was waiting until she had enough money to pay for her kids to get braces, and they had an overdue electricity bill. Two people both want the money. What are they going to choose? Love the other person and give them the money? Or take it for yourself? I think this highlights for us the real lived challenge we face expressing love each day. There's all kinds of things that we seek in life. Love is one of them, but there's many things. And the kind of person who has a reputation for loving is the kind of person that puts love right at the top, so that if they have to push their bodies beyond tiredness and health, they'll choose love over tiredness. They're the kind of person that, would give up security for love. What's beautiful in that story on the radio show is that with $8 in her bank account, she said, I'm going to give you the $5,000. It was just an act of love. She chose love even over security for her family. What about you? What do you put above love? What do you put beneath love? Someone who's known to be less loving, it's not that they're not loving. They can explain love. They can, teach about love. They can walk love into experience and into life. But they're the kind of person that might put success above love, or money above love, or your physical needs and comforts above love. We're all committed to love, but we need to elevate love. Now, this is a bit of a blind spot in the life of the church. It's why sometimes people outside church seem to be more loving than people inside church at times. Even though God teaches that, He is love, and that the Christian ethic is summarized in love God and love your neighbor, there is this blind spot that happens in each of us in the life of the church where we push down love for some other thing that just squeezes in over the top. And we don't even realize we're doing it because of the complexity of life's situations. Well, that's what's going on in the Corinthian church. Did you pick it up? That they'd been taught to love, but so far in the series already, we hear that when it came to leadership, they put knowledge and wisdom above love. We've picked it up already in the series of Corinthians that they've been taught to love, but when it came to things like religious meals, they put their bellies and their appetite above love. They didn't care about the people around them. They'd eat and get drunk, and they'd do it all for themselves. They weren't loving. They'd put other things above love. So now we get to 3 chapters that we've already been introduced to in the last couple of weeks, chapters 12 to 14, which is a section on being a spiritual person, what it means to be truly spiritual. And the Apostle Paul, who wrote this, takes out a whole chapter to talk about elevating love, putting love to a higher place. So elevate love. The first and last sentence of our reading, elevate love. It says at the start, and yet I'll show you the most excellent way. And it says at the end, and now these 3 remain, faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. Sorry, I was meant to have that on the screen. You see it, can I get the next slide? You see the first and the last verse are about elevating love, putting them to the highest place. But the Corinthians had elevated other things above love. And we read in the first 3 verses that they'd elevated tongues above love. In verse 2, they'd elevated prophecy, knowledge, and faith above love. And in verse 3, they'd put giving above love. As soon as I mention tongues and prophecy, everyone goes, ooh, let's talk about that. I just want to be very upfront and say we've actually kind of parked that for the last couple of weeks, and we're going to park it again tonight. We're going to park that because Nigel Fortescue, our senior minister, is committed to doing that in the next 2 weeks, which is really exciting. So come back for that. I'm looking at you. But yeah. So if I tried to explain tongues and prophecy, it would take a fair amount of time. This is actually about love and putting tongues and prophecy at a lower level than love. I want to speak about love today. For now, all we need to know about tongues and prophecy is that they're at the top of the list for the things that the Corinthians were aspiring to, is making them feel more spiritual and making them feel better about themselves in the life of the church. But that's their blind spot. They elevated these spiritual gifts above love. So Paul makes this point about love really clearly in verse 1 to 3, and let me just read it out and just hear it washing over you. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. You feel the repetition. If I have a gift, without love, I'm a noisy nothing. Problem's not the gift. The problem is if you exercise the gift without love, you become a noisy nothing. Christians are meant to be known for their love, but unfortunately, Christians can take something as positive as a spiritual gift and turn it into a noisy nothing. So I was at the dentist this week. Let me tell you a story just of someone that I met, and it relates to this, I promise. I was at the dentist this week, and there was this nice lady, the dental hygienist. She was just really interested in my job. I told her I'm in ministry, and most people glaze over at that point. But she asked me more questions, and she was interested to find out, about the aspects of my job. And I explained to her that I work at the end of the church where I'm trying to help people look into Christianity. I work with people that, don't really understand or don't really believe in Christianity, and I want to help people believe. I said, but what I find is a lot of people feel nervous talking about religion. And there's a lot of fear about talking about religion. She really resonated with that. And I asked her in her upbringing whether her family were all on the same page about religion. And she said, yeah, they were actually. We all grew up Catholic and we would go to Mass. And then some family stuff happened. And then, later on, we kind of reduced our attendance and stuff like that. But there was a united upbringing. And then she paused and she just started to open up about this story when she was at uni. She said, yeah, but when I was at uni, I had an atheist friend and a Christian friend, and the Christian friend invited us to church. So we all went along to church, and it just was off from the minute we walked in. I'm putting that language in her mouth. The way she said it was the preacher was kind of yelling at us, and the preacher was saying all these different categories of people that were going to hell. And then the preacher said, and if you can't speak in tongues, you don't have the Holy Spirit, and you are also going to hell. At which she was feeling very uncomfortable at that point. Her atheist friend walked out of the room. The church spent about 20 minutes speaking in what they called tongues. And then, as a result of that experience, she was quite shaken up. She went and spoke to the minister after and asked some questions. In her experience, she said, he yelled at me, he was angry. And then she said to me, I'm so glad I met a minister today. I just didn't realize how much I'd been sitting on that. I haven't really told anyone about that, and it happened 3 years ago. Isn't it sad that something like that could have happened to her to make her feel there was a cheerlessness about Christianity. She was kind of put off by that experience. And isn't it amazing that I got to have such a good conversation with all these tubes hanging out my mouth? While at the dentist, she was so good, she would pull it out and ask a question and listen to the answer. And anyway, how coincidental, or is it, that I'm preaching 1 Corinthians 13 the very week I have this chat with the dental hygienist. So I was able to memorize, off the top of my memory, quote verse 1, if I speak in tongues of men or of angels but do not have love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. She's like, whoa, that's in the Bible? She felt so validated from her experience. And, she wrote it down. She actually wrote down 1 Corinthians 13. She wrote down our YouTube link. And if she's watching here, thanks for letting us hear your story. Because she gave permission for sharing that story. I'll use it anonymously, though. So, what a story, but how sad that Christians have the ability to take something as excellent as a spiritual gift and turn it into a noisy nothing. How sad that when someone walks into church, they do not experience the love of God. They experience something different. So, you want to elevate love in your life. You want to do better. What is love? What is it that you're elevating? Let's look at this description from verse 4 to 7, because that's the next paragraph in the chapter. And this is a pretty famous description of love. In a lot of weddings that I've been to in my life, 1 Corinthians 13 has been read. And it's popular not just in church, but it is a bit of a poem that's been heard around the world, probably mainly because of weddings, but I went on goodreads.com and I found it had 11,000 likes, so it's pretty popular. And it's good advice for marriage, obviously. That's why people include it in their weddings. However, it wasn't written originally for a wedding, and I just want to reflect on this for a minute. The poem starts by giving us 2 things that love is, followed by 8 things that love is not. This is not a definition of love, it's a bit of a description. But even in the description, the focus is on the negative. in my view, this is a description particularly pointed at the Corinthians, where they needed to hear what they were doing wrong. This is a corrective rather than a broad description. Maybe if the apostle wrote this for a wedding, he would have chosen a different description. This is still great for your wedding, especially if you've already had it. And I really love it because it does talk about love in such helpful and clear ways. And how doesn't it apply to a marriage, seriously? But thinking of it first in its context for the Corinthian church, the first and last thing that the Corinthians needed to hear in this paragraph is that love starts with patience and it ends with perseverance. That's pretty interesting, isn't it? That there's something about the shape of love that you need to be able to put up with the junk and the mess of people. That there's things that irritate you, there's things that may be really unhelpful that you have to just push through. Because love's not ultimately about finding the perfect partner who's got it all together and is perfect and is never going to disappoint you. That person doesn't exist. So love is patient. Now, of course, this isn't saying that you become quiet like a doormat. Through the patience, you don't say a word. There is a comment in verse 6 that love doesn't delight in evil but rejoices in the truth. So if someone is being abused, this isn't a call to suffer with patience in silence, but love isn't a constant critic. Love is patient. Love is able to speak up for the truth, whilst at the same time being calm in the face of conflict, to kind of de-escalate the conflict, to be able to sit and listen in the case of a tension in a relationship, to be able to sit and listen without creating extra heat, but it sucks the oxygen out of the fire and it reduces the conflict because it is patient and persevering. I wonder how you're going at being patient and persevering. If the church was patient and persevering, we would be a counterculture. If everyone here was patient and persevering, we'd stand out as pretty different. You watch any reality TV show, how much patience do you see? It's funny, isn't it? Because a reality TV show is built off the drama and, throwing out like massive issues into a group. People are all doing their thing, they get them all together and then they bring out some thorny topic because they want everyone to yell at each other and create drama so that more people watch the show. Church would make a pretty boring reality TV show if we lived out this call. However, it'd be a great community to be part of, wouldn't it? The reason we like those shows, well, part of the reason we like those shows is because we like looking at everyone else and going, oh, they're so off. And we feel good about ourselves. We think, yeah, I wouldn't have done that, I wouldn't have done that. And we watch these reality TV shows to kind of feel a bit better about ourselves. But what I want to ask you is, what are your blind spots? When do you cause the drama? What is it that you do that, if you have a friend or someone in your family or something that would be able to speak on your behalf right now, what would they say is in your life that creates the drama, that causes the conflict, that's perhaps in their view unloving? I wonder if you could reflect on that. I don't want to go through all of the words listed in this passage. I started with the first and last one, just top and tail. But rather than taking you through all the words in this passage, what I want to do is just put this whole list up and invite you to consider one. I don't want you to walk away with the ability to describe and explain the concepts of love. I want you to walk away and become more loving. So if you were to look at this list and pick one that you've struggled with this last little while, what would be one blind spot that you could grow in? Just pick one. I'm going to leave this slide up for a little bit, give you the opportunity. Just one word that you think, yeah, I could grow there to become more loving. While you're thinking about it, why don't I share a little bit? Because what I want to be able to helpfully say from the front is a ministry team, a person like me, we are constantly wrestling to be loving in all of these ways. And if I had to pick one, it's hard because I could explain from any single word all of the mistakes that are going on in my life. But for the purpose of the exercise, if I had to pick one, I'd choose self-seeking. A quick story this week, I was invited to go onto a podcast, and when I'm driving to go to the podcast, I'm thinking the whole way, voice in one ear, it's saying, are you got anything to add to this? What are you going to say that's going to be smart? Don't embarrass yourself, say cool stuff. This is going to, who are you to get on this podcast? And then in the other ear, there's this voice going, no, you got experience. You got things you could add. Maybe you could say some wise stuff. Maybe people would even respect you more. What's the problem with both of those voices? They're all about me. It's completely self-seeking. So that's me being vulnerable and open, that I'm listening to my own self-seeking tendencies while I'm driving out to do this thing. And I begin to pray. I say, Lord, help me with this. And I find that the Holy Spirit's ministering to me as I drive. God hushes the voices. He gets me to start thinking about, well, if someone's listening to this, what would benefit them? And then as you go and meet the people who are putting together the podcast, how can you be encouraging to them? How can you love the people that you're about to see? Just shift the focus. There's my example. I'm working on not being self-seeking. What's yours? Why don't you talk to people after? Why don't you go and be honest and vulnerable and share what's something you're struggling with? Because the goal is to become more loving. Well, what happens if we don't change? What happens if we stay unloving? Well, obviously, firstly, it's a pretty unhealthy church if it's filled with unloving people. Not only do we cause division together, but before God we become like a noisy, resounding gong. But there is another possibility as well. One of the consequences if we don't change is there might be a visitor here today who will never come back. Just reflecting on the dental hygienist who had a bad experience at church. I was talking to my wife about it, and she said, it just makes your heart sink because it's your worst nightmare. You've got someone that you really want to come and meet, bring to church because you want them to know the love of God. And they finally say yes to coming to church. And that day they come, this is her words, which I find really helpful, the love of God gets dulled down and lost in translation. The love of God gets dulled down and lost in translation. This is so bad. And if you're here as a visitor today, if you're checking out church, if you're not sure what you think of Jesus, then it would be so sad if we took away your understanding of the love of God because we dulled it down and lost it in translation by our attitude and our actions. What we really want is not for you to look at church and think they're an amazingly loving group of people. We want you to look at God and say He is an amazingly loving God. And in fact, the church is constantly growing. We're working towards God. God is love. Love didn't come from the church. It came from God. And because the church community is aspiring to be like God, we ought to be more loving. But please, if you're a guest today, don't miss the love of God. I'm talking about elevating love in the church community. And I said the main goal is for people to go away more loving, but even higher than that. The goal would be to understand the love of God. Because if you understand the love of God, it changes everything. It changes your heart. It changes your attitude and behavior. It brings you into an experience of love that you want to live out. So that's where I want to finish today, with the love of God. Because the last paragraph, or really the last major paragraph, verse 8 on, says, love never fails. How does love never fail when my love fails and your love fails? Love never fails because God's love never fails. Because God is love and His love never ends. With God in charge, love is going to get the final say. When we say love never fails, the word fails literally is the idea that it never collapses, it never passes away, it never becomes like an ancient ruin of a city. It will keep going forever and ever and ever. It'll outlast other things like tongues and prophecies because it never finishes up. If only the Corinthians could realize it, but they're so fixated on the spiritual outworking of gifts that they've lost the heart of the Christian faith, which is the love of God. The love of God is like the high point of Christianity. It's the crescendo. It's the sweet song that draws us to God. It's what we come and remember at Easter. The death of Jesus is an act of love, and that's the thing that I'll come to in a second. I want to pull up a Bible passage which expresses the character of God's love, and it says in 1 John 4:8, God is love. This is how he showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. This is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. There's a lot in there. I'm not going to do a mini sermon on this passage. I just want to highlight two things that are there in the yellow bit. Two things. Firstly, God is love. Secondly, God has shown his love. What does it mean God is love? It means God in his very being is love. He's loving. You can't replace it and say love is God. No, God is love. And God existed before anything else existed in a state of love, a perfect state of love. And after everything winds up, he will continue to exist in an eternal state of love. That's what it means when it says God is love. The other thing is that he's shown his love. This is how he showed his love. It says that he sent his Son. He sent Jesus into the world. And if you remember the character of Jesus, he's full of patience and kindness. He doesn't envy. He doesn't boast. He is like the perfect example of 1 Corinthians 13. And he even persevered to the point of giving his own life. So we talk about elevating love above other things. He elevated love beyond his physiological needs to the point of death. He even came from heaven to earth to die on a cross as an act of love so that we could have life, so that we could have our sins forgiven. There's a fair bit of concepts there. If you're a guest here today and you're still trying to figure out the death of Jesus and what that's about, if you're still trying to understand the love of God and how you can trust that he's loving, then we'd say that Easter is what that's all about, the death of Jesus. I've only got like a couple of verses here to explain it. I want to invite you to come back at Easter. It's a few weeks away. We're going to have more time to think about the death of Jesus. And at Easter, that's when we'll be able to see even more clearly the love of God. So please come back for that. In the meantime, God has shown his love. God is love. And if the high point of showing his love is what he did in the past through Jesus dying on the cross, well, the great news for Christians, the great news for those of you who call Jesus Lord, is that there is a future day where you will even find another high point in the love story. And this is where I want to close. It's in our passage today. It's there in verse 12. It says, "For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known." Talks about having dim sight at the moment, a bit of a dull knowledge. Here's a picture of a mirror. This is the ancient mirror, not the mirror you're expecting. The mirror you think of glass is, high resolution. But what they had was pretty dull and faded. You polish a bit of metal and look at that. You can see the outline of your face, that kind of thing. What it's saying is right now in this life, you need prophets. You need people with knowledge and insight to be able to help you to understand God so that you can appreciate the love of God. But there will come a day when you don't need prophets, you don't need special knowledge. All that will pass away. Why? Because you'll see God face to face. And when you meet God face to face, you'll understand his love. And when you understand his love, you'll realize that now you know God just as he knows you. I just find that last sentence so uplifting. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. It compares my knowledge of God to his knowledge of me. That's the perfect relationship of love that we will come to in the end. So let's get excited about the love of God. Let's elevate love. Let's walk away more loving as a result of what we've heard tonight. These three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love.